Hi guys, my name is Karl Greenwood and I'm here in the lovely 53-2 cottage to tell you a story tonight. And the reason why I'm here to tell you a story is because we're trying to raise money for our amazing charity, the Wood Street Mission. If at the end of this story you can spare anything you can, that'd be amazing. Our story tonight is The Monster in the Canal by Billy Collins. The Monster in the Canal. A troll is only as good as his bridge. Roy was not a troll, despite what people were saying. And whilst it wasn't the Golden Gate Bridge or the Millennium Bridge, his bridge was pretty decent, as bridges go. It was somewhere along the Bridgewater Way, under a busy route into the city. It was damp. The air was humming with the rumble of overhead traffic. On both sides, the concrete was plastered with graffiti, from avant-garde scribbles to Turner Prize-worthy tributes to legendary mates. Rest in peace, Timo. Kenny Grace loves David Davis. Call this number for cut price freezers. In his rare, fanciful moments, Roy considered charging a gallery fee to those who passed under his bridge. But he decided that art, no matter how crap, should always be free. Besides, he didn't have room for a gift shop. Roy shared his bridge with a small colony of pigeons, who were, to be honest, pretty shoddy roommates. He didn't mind so much though. He once did a quiz in a discarded copy of Closer that told him he was an introvert, which meant he preferred snug nights in with a glass of rosé to hitting the town with the girls. Whilst Roy never tried having lots of friends, he had made do on his own. That being said, Roy was never really alone. And this was because he had a secret. A great big secret. He didn't like to boast, but he was very good at keeping secrets. You might think it can't be hard to keep a secret when the only people you've got to tell are the pigeons. But even if he could tell the pigeons, and even if he had other people to tell, Roy knew he wouldn't. Like ancient coins, Bronze Age swords and shopping trolleys, the best secrets can oxidise if exposed to too much air. Some things are so precious that to speak them aloud puts them in danger of rust. From under his bridge, Roy was privy to far more secrets than most. He saw all kinds of things. He saw teenagers in love make promises they couldn't keep. He saw a young man tell his dog that things were tough now, but it would surely pick up soon. He saw an old woman with wild cotton hair dump a box of photographs into the canal, muttering and cursing as she did so. Roy kept all these things to himself. And just as he knew he would never tell anyone about them, he knew that he would never tell anyone about the monster in the canal. He first saw it in the early hours of a December morning. Christmas was approaching, and at night the houses along the canal were lit up with coloured bulbs, dangled and twinkling. This morning, icy mist was settling on the water, and fallen leaves were bobbing along the city centre like weary commuters, off to earn their acorns. Most people were staying indoors, hunkering down to see out the festive period. And so the bridge had been quiet, disturbed only by the odd jogger, dog walker or goose. Christmas didn't mean much to Roy. He liked the decorations, and if pushed he could fumble through Silent Night on the recorder. But he didn't go in for big celebrations. Roy's to-do list that morning consisted of breakfast and a bit of a gentle tidy. But he was only 2 bites into his sausage roll when the enormous creature leapt from the canal. It was a fish. There was no doubt about that. But it was bigger than any fish he'd ever seen. In fact, it was about the size of a small car. It had great slithering whiskers, slick grey scales, fins like enormous folding fans, and 2 impossible whirlpool eyes. It burst from the water like a punchline to a bad joke, and almost as quick as it had appeared, splash! It was gone, drenching Roy in murky water and pondweed, soaking through his cagoule and spoiling a perfectly good sausage roll. The problem with being by yourself is that when absolutely incredibly unbelievable things happen, you have no one to check in with. If there's nobody to say, "Did you see that?" how can you be sure you aren't just seeing things? That it wasn't just a trick of the light, or even a dream? Roy pinched himself, twice. He was wide awake. He had just seen a giant fish in the Bridgewater Canal. The question now was what to do about it. A blabbermouth would tell the council, or the Wildlife Trust, and soon hordes of tourists would be flocking to the canal to take photographs and buy novelty fish-shaped lollipops. Maybe competitive fishermen would pull a bounty on the fish, catch it, and use it to supply Trafford's chippies for the next year. Or the marine biology bigwigs at Salford University would capture the fish for complicated experiments and launch a breeding programme. Roy didn't like the sound of any of this. And worst of all was the thought that people might be interested in him. He'd become the fish man, hounded by the press for his story. He'd lose all privacy and have to wear disguises. His bridge would never be peaceful again. And 20 years from now, he'd be stumbling his way through a Viennese waltz on Strictly in a desperate bid to hold on to his fame. That kind of media attention just wasn't something Roy was ready for. At the very least, it would ruin Christmas. No, Roy was not a blabbermouth. And this was going to be a secret. A great big fish-shaped secret. But he was still curious. Roy peered over the canal's edge, hoping to catch another glimpse of the creature. But the water was dark, and all he could see was his own reflection. He looked older than he remembered, and tired. His bobble hat sat at an interesting angle. He frowned. Another problem with being alone is you don't have anyone to tell you if you have, say, spinach in your teeth, or if you've really let yourself go. Roy removed his hat, smoothed down his hair, zipped up his cagoule and sighed. Maybe it was because it was nearly Christmas, and maybe it was because of his soggy sausage roll. Maybe it was just one of those days. But for the first time in a long while, Roy felt lonely. There was something about the fish that was tugging at his gut, something he couldn't quite let go of. It was ugly, like him, and damp, like him. They were both undoubtedly odd, and he couldn't know for sure, but if he had to guess, he'd probably say that the fish was an introvert too. Even the pigeons had a flock, but the fish seemed truly one of a kind. Like him. One of a kind. The more he thought about it, the more he realised he didn't just want to see the fish again. He needed to. So, he sat. Every day on the canal's edge, staring at the water. He sat through the rain, sleet and snow. He spoke to the fish in his head. Please come back, he thought. I think we might be kindred spirits. And you don't find kindred spirits very often. By Christmas Day, Roy was ready to give up. The twinkling coloured bulbs and inflatable candy canes had ceased to bring him any joy. The bridge seemed darker than usual. His fingers were numb with cold, and his arse was getting damp. By all accounts, he was downright miserable. So miserable, he began to wonder if maybe he'd made the fish up all along. He couldn't even get excited about his sausage roll. Unwrapping it felt like a chore, and the first bite tasted stodgy and stale. The world suddenly seemed wholly unfair, and Roy felt silly, waiting for a fish that clearly had no interest in him. In a flash of temper, quite out of character, he chucked his sausage roll in the canal. It floated for a moment, like a pastry canoe, but then upended itself and sank sadly down. There was a moment of quiet. If Roy felt silly before, he felt even sillier now. There was no need for that kind of behaviour. And even if you are having a bad day, whoosh! In one tremendous gulp, the giant fish emerged from the water and gobbled up the sausage roll. Roy scrambled to his feet, boots sliding in the mud, his trousers halfway down his backside. The fish barrel rolled, churning up the canal, and gurgled as if to say, "Thanks for the sausage roll." "You're welcome, fish," he said, to be polite. And then it swam right up the canal's edge and looked up at Roy with its shining, watery eyes. He knelt down, reached out a hand, and very, very gently placed his palm on its head. It was cold and a little slimy, and after a moment, turned tail and swam away. But as he watched it go, Roy felt different. He looked up at the Christmas lights lining the canal, saw glitter-bombed trees through patio doors, and felt less lonely. Because he knew there was something else out there. Something as strange and rare and fond of sausage rolls as he was. That Christmas, Roy sat under his bridge as usual, but he kept a special eye out. And every now and then, he'd see something shimmering in the water, hidden amongst the weeds and crisp packets. Roy knew that there are impossible, miraculous things in the world, often so close, you can just about touch them. "Don't worry, fish," he'd whisper. "Your secret's safe with me." And that was the monster in the canal. Well, guys, I hope this Christmas you manage to find your monster in a canal. Or if you don't, I hope you have a really good Christmas, whatever tier you may be in. Good night, guys. See you soon.
Hello, my name's Wendy Albiston, and I'm going to read a story in aid of the Wood Street Mission. The story is called Fairy Tale of Salford, and it's by Chloe McLaughlin. When Peter Denton turned 10 years old, he was sure about one thing. He was definitely old enough to start walking to school on his own. His mum had pulled a bit of a funny face, but he had a quick retort. After all, his dad had sent him a phone, and so come Tuesday, 10 years after he was born, off he walked into a known unknown. His mum had always made him walk the quickest route in a rush to get to work, avoiding the towering trees and windy paths of the Salford parks. But today was Peter's first taste of freedom, so on a new journey he embarked. Where his mum had made him dip down the grimy alleyway, he burst through the proud iron gates of his local park and followed that windy path, the one the trees made just a little bit dark. He gasped in awe of this slice of city heaven, so near yet so far from the red brick houses that stood to attention in neat lines street by street. Wow, Peter thought, this really is quite a treat. But as he walked down the path on his journey to school, Peter noticed a woman, one he wasn't sure he'd ever want to meet. She was thin and frail, her skin crimpled with craters and lines, her white hair frizzy and unkempt, her dirty clothes antiques, surely from another time. As he sauntered towards her, a boy in his prime, her head whipped up and her eyes bored into his, and a chill flew up the boy's spine. He kept on walking, his head held high, as the old lady sighed, her eyes returning to her lap. And Peter thought he was glad he was now 10, no longer 9. Peter didn't think of the lady for the rest of that day, forgotten as he kicked an old battered ball around in the usual break time way. Painted as Santa for the classroom display? No, thoughts of the old lady were kept well at bay as Peter went about his normal school day. But on his way home with his friends having a laugh and a chuckle, Peter noticed the old woman still sat in her place, twisting a gold ring just above her knuckle. He wondered for a moment if she'd moved at all, but his friends were already planning their next bit of trouble, their eyes lighting up as they jumped in a December puddle. And Peter forgot about his internal struggle. Back at home, he looked in the fridge, a growing boy hungry but the shelves almost bare. A block of cheese, some ham and an apple were the only things there. Pulling them out, he jumped on a chair, opened the bread bin in the hope of one slice, but there was nothing there. So the boy ate the apple and sent yet another unanswered prayer. Later that night, his tummy rumbled and roared, a pain from his hunger that could no longer be ignored. He crept down the stairs. The cheese in his fridge will surely be his reward when he heard a sound, one he absolutely abhorred. His mother's tears. And so Peter climbed back up the stairs again, his hands over his ears as he swallowed his own fears and put his pain to bed. The next day he awakened, still hungry from before, his stomach still screaming for something more. His mum was there getting ready for a shift at the store, a promise that one day it would be like before. But for now, school would have to do. They both knew the score. As Peter walked on his way to school, his body aching from the lack of fuel, he spotted the old woman again, still sitting there like a fool. Peter thought for a moment, should he ask if she's okay? But the boy went on by. Talking to old biddies wasn't cool. The days went by and Christmas grew close. The holidays just around the corner, so exciting for many, but for him the thing he dreaded most. The last day of school, the last day of dinners, of proper meals even though they were gross. His mum was struggling to keep things afloat since his dad walked out and took away her hope. Peter resigned himself for 2 weeks of dry toast. As the school bell rang on that last day of term, his friends running out so glad not to have to return, Peter sighed as he stepped outside, his eyes widening at the sight before him, white for as far as the eye could see. His stomach rumbled, his fears reaffirmed. A Salford winter wonderland. Through the snow he trudged, through the park he went, and there she was, sat looking so unloved, the old woman Peter had avoided, the old woman he had judged. He approached her slowly, unsure at first. Should he approach her? But then he thought, what was the worst that could happen? And so he wandered over, wishing he had a speech he'd rehearsed as he sat beside the old woman, her clothes full of dirt. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice quiet and meek. He thought for a moment maybe she didn't hear him, but then she opened her mouth to speak. "Werther's original." He took one slowly from her grubby hand, popping it into his mouth and sucking it in his cheek, his mind intrigued by the woman's mystique. "Have you moved?" asked Peter, his concerns spiralling out. "Just it's cold and snowing and, well, I don't want you dying her out." "What's your name?" asked the old woman, as though she'd not heard him at all. "Peter," the boy replied, wondering if he should really be telling her what he was called. "Violet," she said, her voice that gravelly Salford rough. as she popped the last Werther's original from a crinkled paper cuff. Peter nodded, unsure whether to push or if he'd already done enough. But his mum had taught him morals and to be good, a man who helped whenever he could. And so the boy stood and did what he should. "Can I walk you home, Violet?" he asked, a Salford accent thick as overgrown grass. "I am home, love," she said. "Now go on, my boy. Off you run ahead." Peter was torn, not knowing what to do. He wished her farewell and began to run home, taking the stairs 2 by 2. He needed to speak to someone who he thought might have a clue about what to do about this woman he barely even knew. When he got home, he found his mum with a bag of shopping standing on a chair, the bare shelves restocking. Packet noodles and pasta, bread and veg and ready for chopping. Delight so shocking to a child so hungry. His mum must have felt his eyes upon him as she turned to face him from where she was stood watching. "Boss gave us a bonus," she smiles, her eyes warm and bright for the first time in many a night. "So I bought us some staples and you a little treat." She smiled as she held up Angel Delight. "Butterscotch," she smiled, and suddenly everything felt like it was going to be all right. Except, Peter thought as he held on the little packet, the old woman outside with barely a jacket. He looked at the treat bought just for him, and he knew what he had to do. "Soup all right for tea?" His mum broke his spell with her quiet uttering. He nodded his head, wondering about the old woman shuddering and suffering, and Peter knew what he had to do. "Can I have it in a flask?" Peter did ask. His heart hammered in his chest. "The lad's playing footy round back," he lied, his mind focusing on his new task. "All right," said his mother, "but no dishing it out. I know you've gone hungry whilst I've been without, but if we use this well, it'll see us through Christmas, of that I've no doubt." The boy nodded and asked for his Angel Delight to go. His mum sighed, but she did it though, and off Peter ran with his flask in one hand and his treat in the other, into the snow, with a quick promise not to be late to his mother. He strode on through the park where his old friend was sat. He wondered for a moment if she felt the cold at all, before sitting beside her and offering her something hot, a little token he could offer, the only thing he had got. "I brought you some soup," said Peter, not sure what to say. "I didn't want you to go hungry if you've been sat out here all day." The woman turned, her eyes shimmering, suddenly so bright, despite there being no street or daylight. Her smile, though slight, set everything in Peter's world right. "You're very polite," the old woman named Violet smiled, "for thinking of me tonight. But I don't need that. I'm all right." "Well, what about this?" Peter asked with a shrug as he held up his Angel Delight sat steady in a mug. "Butterscotch? Like your sweets?" The old woman smiled and held his hand, for she knew that the boy had so little to his name, and while he may not understand the love she felt for him in that moment, she knew she had to give him this one final command. "Go home, my boy, and eat what you can. This soup and delight is yours to enjoy." "But you'll be cold and hungry, and no one should be alone at Christmas," the boy whined. "Don't you worry, you've been more than kind. But I'm waiting for me husband, so it's time you were inside." Peter wasn't sure. He didn't know what to do, but his old friend Violet seemed sure she knew. So he held out his hand and took his things back. But before he could go, his old friend couldn't help but ask, "Do you believe in Christmas wishes?" Peter shook his head. He didn't believe in prayers and dreams. Everything in the world was exactly as it seems, unfair and unjust, but that he was sure. A better world, something he had dreamed of before. "Make one tonight," the old woman implored. "Don't worry about what you can afford. Just make the wish, one that can't be ignored." And with that, she stood and moved from her spot. Shuffling away, the boy could do nothing but watch before running back home, his soup only just still hot. He slurped it down quick and spooned down his angel delight, delicious and thick. As his mum went out for a night job at last, the boy thought of the old woman and what she had asked, and before his hope was dashed, made a wish, his wording exact. "Let my mum be okay, not have to worry no more. No more men at the door demanding more and more. Let there be food on the table, and let her smile like she did before." The boy went to sleep, thinking nothing more of his wish. And when he woke up from being fast asleep, nothing had changed. But as along the stairs he did creep, he noticed his mother trying not to weep, as a stranger on the door handed over presents and food in a tidy little heap. He bounded down the stairs, wondering if his dream had come true, when he caught glance of the stranger, and suddenly he knew, for who should be stood there but Violet. And as he went to say something, she shook her head and smiled with a wink and mouthed, "Merry Christmas." And then she was gone in a wish's blink. Merry Christmas.
Ho, 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 ho!